It's an Evan Williams.
Oh, you got a theme going here.
Yes. And
Yeah.
the other side says, this is probably.
Our guest today is Sarah Wells, whose book, American Honey, is just out.
It is a memoir in essays exploring our need for, or my need for attention, and how that manifested itself as a child, the things that I wanted and needed from my dad, possibly. So there's a lot of essays about my relationship with my dad, but primarily it's about my marriage to my husband, Brandon, and the first 10 years of our marriage, exploring how we changed and evolved in that time, and the temptations and challenges that marriages face, and some of the hilarious, ridiculous things that you go through as a couple that are pretty mundane typically, but that all of us tend to have to face in one way or the other. So exploring all of those things and trying to learn and grow through them.
But what you're saying about attention, that is interesting to everybody because it's a human need. We
Right.
all want that, right? And then there's a male-female thing that goes on with fathers, daughters, husbands, wives, all that. So the subtitle, Field Guide to Resisting Temptation, is just wonderful. In fact, I'm going to ask you to share a prompt, but that would be a really good one. Just like, what's your field guide to resisting temptation? Right. I always find that every project requires something different from me as a writer. And it's not always something that I necessarily wanted. How was this project different for you than your other writing projects?
Well, a lot of the essays were written in the moment. So okay. There's a real, a literal survival guide component to a lot of the content. When you're writing about vulnerable material, particularly a marriage relationship that is, in some cases very tenuous, when the things that you're going through together, I think writing memoir in the moment is important for, like, there's a therapeutic component to it. And then there's also the crafting and art aspect of trying to work through, this is what I think now that I've written it down. I see that. How do I make it art? How do I make it beautiful and matter in a way that matters beyond just my moment?
I don't know why I'm always quoting Brian Doyle. That's not a bad person to quote. He's got a quote about essays. He says, a bad personal essay is about the writer. A good personal essay is about the rest of us. So you're talking about that, right? Like how you start with you, and that's necessary and wonderful. And that's the road in memoir. But that the challenge of it being so alive in you is getting to that place where it's bigger than you. It sounds like it's also challenging to write about something that's so alive simply because it is so alive. I mean, when I write about, something that bothered me 15 years ago, I have some feelings about it, and I might go eat some chocolate chip cookies to take care of that. But yes, it's not as burning in me. It sounds like this was pretty vulnerable material for you.
Yes. In fact, the subtitle essay, A Field Guide to Resisting Temptation, I wrote during that year as like, okay, here's what you need to do, Sarah, in order to get through this season. And it was published the week that my husband had a similar situation happen out at a bar. Like, we were living in the moment of trying to resist various temptations in our marriage.
But it can be such a good way too. The writing can take you a little bit away, even though you're in it. There's some distance where, like, you writing yourself a field guide as this is going on is an example of that. Like, you're stepping aside for a minute and saying, this is what you need to do, even though you might go right back into it after you close your laptop or whatever. So that seems like the challenge, in that your material was alive, vulnerable, personal. Are you finding some sort of unexpected payoff to tackling this material?
I feel like the writing of it saved my marriage. Even though it was writing very vulnerable and scary material, it forced vulnerability within my marriage as well. And so personal payoff, big time. And
that's a pretty good payoff.
Yeah, we were able to work through a lot of things that otherwise my natural tendency is to take care of things myself. I am a fixer. Like, I don't need anybody's help. Whatever I'm going through, don't worry, Sarah has it. I can manage. And this process forced so much vulnerability and reliance on other people.
I think marriage and all relationships in our culture, we have permission to just sort of move on pretty easily,
Yeah.
And that's a good thing for some people because they're in really bad situations. But one of the temptations when you're in a relationship is just to say, this isn't working, I'm going to move on. And when I've gone through things like this, I have felt bolstered by my ability to stick with it. For you just said, Sarah has it. Sarah always has it. For
Yeah.
Sarah to open up and receive help is like a massive, like not only for your marriage, but just like a life thing.
I was writing about this a little bit this morning, the value of love being patient, and
Mm-hmm.
how one of the temptations is to just abandon it and be like, you
Mm-hmm.
know what, this was great for a while. In my case, there hasn't been a massive affair, that we've
Mm-hmm.
never abused each other. There are things that prompt right and true good reasons to leave a marriage. It's
Right.
more like, I'm uncomfortable right now. I'm
Right.
not happy right now. And like, it is tempting to leave in those moments. I have gotten a lot of mileage out of sweet potatoes. Those suckers are hard to slice. Push the knife blade through again and again. You have to use both hands, one on the handle and another on the blade. We prepare these sweet potato fries at least once a week, Brandon and I. He sits in the olive green folding chair on one side of the kitchen while I slice. The thump of the knife against the cutting board cracks and vibrates throughout the room. The knife slides against the flesh of the potato like leaflets of paper turned against each other. Pages of a book rustled, then ripped from the spine. Shh, crack, shh, crack. It's what I'd like to do with days from the last year, tear them off the calendar. All of the moments I worried over emails that turned from professional to suggestive, the misinterpreted hugs and smiles, the attempts my colleague made to kiss me, the times I hid my phone and laptop, afraid he would send a message and Brandon might see it. It has been a full year and a half since the first incident at a bar, his hand on my thigh and my shocked grin. No, you have to stop touching me. It has been months since my loose-armed protests, asking him to stop saying all the right things. It was the wrong man speaking those words. I had spent months navigating my own temptations, worrying over whether I had asked for it, whether I actually wanted it, whether I was unhappy in my marriage, whether I was sending some unspoken signal to him that said yes when all my lips kept saying was no. When he finally stopped after one last attempt during the summer, one last hand on the thigh, one last back rub, one last text that said, I only stopped because you told me to. 1 year after he first confessed his crush, I exhaled. Phew, done. It's December now. Just a few days ago, I left human resources training trembling. During the session, I texted Brandon. You were right. It was sexual harassment. Oh, do you think I've overreacted? I asked my husband as I cut the sweet potatoes. Shh, crack, shh, crack. He sits in the folding chair on the other side of the kitchen, and I face the opposite direction, cutting and cutting. Maybe I blew it all out of proportion. Maybe it was all in my head. The space between us expands into miles, me on a volcanic island, him on a distant shore. Until recently, the most I had said to Brandon about my colleague was, he's still a problem. I couldn't give him details. I didn't want to hurt him, and I thought I could handle it on my own. After the training session, I had to tell him more. All. I mean, I know you said it was a kick in the balls, but I don't know what that means. I keep cutting, facing away. We tell each other everything now. So that's the beginning of the chapter of me trying to ask Brandon how everything actually made him feel.
Yeah, no, that's so good. I love that opening. I have gotten a lot of mileage. I wrote it down. I've gotten a lot of mileage out of sweet potatoes.
Well, I've found that when I have tried to write about major subjects like this one, something that's very vulnerable or challenging, there's no good, easy entry point with big subjects like that, that when you narrow in on the particular, something mundane or simple or some kind of activity like cutting sweet potatoes, that image blossoms into something greater. Usually whatever is like hiding in your subconscious emerges. I would challenge listeners to pick something that is mundane or some image that maybe won't let you go, and write about that image and see where it leads you, and let it blossom on its own.
Yeah, that's so good, because we want to write about these huge topics, but sometimes that sweet potato is the gateway to that.
Yes,
and when you try it the other way, it's so much harder. That's so good. The other thing about the sweet potato that sticks out to me is that it's sweet. It's a potato, but it's sweet. And you've got this title that's also really sweet.
So American honey is a kind of bourbon.
Okay.
that Brandon and I started to drink together when this season of our lives started.
Mhm.
And it's a very sweet bourbon. And I was really drawn to this idea of American honey. Alcohol in general is a temptation.
Mhm.
It's something that can be really life-giving and also life-taking away.
Mhm. Mhm.
If you like what you heard, check out the link below to order a copy of Sarah's book and to read more of her work. Be sure to hit subscribe so that you're notified of new author interviews and writing prompts. I look forward to seeing you next time at the Memoir Cafe.